Hi, I'm Suzanne.
And I'm Peter, and together we are Sex Advice for Seniors. And today we're talking to James Earl, who is a relationship counselor and has been a philosopher at the American University in Richmond. And we wanted to talk to him really about some of the things that are brought up in an article he's written recently, the connection between love and sex, really. And I think we were both interested in this sense that we have from your article, that expectation that love and sex should be combined, and that, you know, that creates all sorts of problems. Have I got that right?
Yeah, I think exactly right. I mean, I think the problem is not that the two don't have a relationship; it's the kind of relationship they have.
Right.
So, if I can use a sort of metaphor, which is maybe helpful, if I was going to go to an art gallery, I love going to art galleries. I really do. I can happily walk around an art gallery by myself, but especially in a new city, new art gallery. But if I was going to do that, I would probably prefer to walk around that art gallery with my partner, because I know that she likes the post-impressionists and I like Rembrandt, and she can't quite understand why I like Rembrandt, and I can't quite understand why she likes Cézanne, but, you know, there we are. And we have a really great time, good sort of argumentative experience. And when we come out, we feel quite loved up. Now, compare that to, say, a random person that I just pick off the street. I think that might be quite a boring experience. So clearly, being in the art gallery with someone you love is probably going to be a better experience. However, this is the thing. If I was walking around the art gallery and said, "Isn't it lovely being here? I love you so much. This is why we're here, because I love you," she'd be looking a little quizzical, and then I go on, "But it really is fantastically loving being in this art gallery." She'd say, "Shut the well up and just look at the pictures," you know. So the point is not that love can't get you into the position where you might want to have sex, and afterwards you might feel very loved up. It's just that the actual sexual relationship isn't predominantly about love; it's about sex. Which is kind of obvious, but I think a lot of people miss it. I think what happens is we believe that what the function of sex is to express love. And it's not a kind of helpful view, because really the whole of the relationship should really be about love, about kindness, caring, thoughtfulness, bearing you in mind, and all that stuff. And to sort of say that specifically sex is about doing that seems to me to make sex do too much work, and also to demean the rest of the relationship in terms of where love actually should be.
But isn't that kind of the fate of sex, really, that it becomes entangled with love and an expression of love, and in many ways the most basic expression of the love that we may feel to someone, and anything that gets in the way of it can be a real threat, not just to sex, but to love.
I think so. I mean, I think the whole point about love is that it's the feeling of connectedness and caring that we get with somebody, and that one of the ways in which we can enjoy that connection is sexually. But there's nothing specific about sex that is connected to love in that respect. It's just that it's so basically it's on a list. We can go out for dinner, we can play chess, we can have sex, we can play cards, we can go for a walk, we can talk about the day. It's not any more significant than that. But what we tend to do with it is say, oh, it's far more significant than that. For example, it's the key thing that distinguishes you from friends. And that the fundamental. Now, actually, it's very rarely the key thing that distinguishes us from friends. The key thing is usually that we're living together, probably have kids together, share a mortgage together. We're sharing a life together. That's way more than what's happening in a bedroom.
Apart from one thing, I think. I mean, you can play chess with anyone you like, and you can go out and play football with any team you like, But we seem to have gone down the route of sex is only with this one person, that it's not just on a list, but it's always at the head of the list somehow.
Well, I agree that I
on.
agree that's how it's conceptualized, but I don't think that's actually a particularly good model. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes our language tries to embody that idea. So, for example, we talk about when we're young, free, and single, or just dating, we have sex, and
Yeah.
then when we're sort of committed to somebody, we don't have sex, we make love to them. But the problem with that is really that the quality of the sex you have with somebody that you have been with for a long time is not the same as the quality of the sex you have with somebody you first meet. And unfortunately, most people recognize when they first meet somebody in that first few weeks, the sex is usually good fun, really good fun.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
quite often that does go missing later on. Now, if you think about it, if sex was dependent on love,
Yeah.
at that time when you first meet, when you don't love somebody, it's good. And when you're later on in the relationship, 2, 3 years in, 10 years in, and it's not so good, where you do have love, it seems to me rather ironic that we say sex is an expression of love and dependent on love. It's just not. And that's really not to say that love with people sex with somebody you just met is likely to be better. I really don't think that actually. All that we're working on there is an enjoyable feeling of novelty
Novelty.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
newness.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, therefore, a lot of people say what goes wrong is that we lose the novelty and newness, and then sex isn't as interesting. But I think that's probably part of Esther Perel's thesis. Her famous Mating
Yeah.
in Captivity, which I really admire. Actually, it's a
Yeah.
wonderful book.
Yeah.
But I think it kind of mistakes the problem. I think the problem isn't that we lose novelty, and we should try and get it back by somehow being mysterious to each other. I mean, I had a client, in fact, who read Esther Perel's book at my suggestion, and she said, "Oh, it's a very interesting thesis." What she says is that, we try to be best friend, co-parent, business partner, and red hot lover. It's too long a list. And I
Yeah.
said,
Yeah.
yeah, that's what she's saying. But then my client said, the trouble is what she seems to be saying is that you should add something else into that list, which is you should be mysterious too. And she says it's really difficult to be that as well. So I
Yeah.
think it's not really about the loss of novelty. And I think what it's really about is the idea that if we trust somebody, we can really express our sexuality to them. And that you cannot do with somebody you've just met, not usually anyway. It's very hard to do that. What you're
Mm-hmm.
experiencing with somebody you first met
I would
is.
argue completely the opposite of that, actually.
Would
I
you?
think that's
Yeah.
absolute rubbish. Yeah, I think, yeah, I think that I am much more free to be absolutely liberated in whatever fantasy I have with someone with whom I have no investment. In fact, I love having anonymous, fantasy orientated strangers because there's no repercussions. I can literally just be expressive in that way without any fear that anything that I might do might not appeal to this person that I've only just met. In fact, I think that a lot of swinging relationships, for instance, are completely about keeping your love relationship in that zone, which is kind of monogamous, you know, predictable sex, and using other people as a way to express fantasies, because that way, if the person that you're with isn't up for whatever you're into, you haven't lost anything. Whereas there's an enormous amount that you're going to lose. And this is my challenge with a lot of this, is that often we go into relationship talking about any of this stuff. We then find that we're with someone who's quite vanilla, and we're the complete opposite of vanilla. And that person's not up for kinkiness at all, because it's just not on there. They're just not interested. It's not their thing, right? So then you've got this big decision to make about, well, what do we do now? Because we're committed to each other. We've done something, and now we're going down this road, having kids. I mean, this was my experience. I got married in my 20s. I didn't talk about sex with anybody, with my husband. We didn't discuss our fantasies. Then one day, when we hadn't had sex for a while, he said something about sex, and I said, if you want to have sex with me, you know what? Why don't you just put on some porn and I might get a little bit aroused, right? And he went, you're a sicko. And that was the end of that discussion. And eventually off we went our merry way. So I personally think it's hard to reconcile people's desires once you've actually made that commitment. You're invested, and then you're like, oh God, I now need to tell somebody that clearly is submissive that I'm submissive. Like, oh, and you're submissive. Oh, that's not going to work.
I actually agree with everything you just said, because I think the stakes at the beginning of a relationship are really low, and the stakes in a long-term relationship are really high. And so if you're going to risk actually sharing and being yourself sexually, it's much more difficult in a long-term relationship. And that's precisely why I don't tend to get people who've just met coming to see me. I get couples that have been together a long time. The question is whether it's boredom and familiarity which is doing it, because I don't think it is. I think it's exactly what you're saying, which is a lack of sharing who we actually are. And although you can do that very low stakes with somebody you've just met, sometimes, it's not difficult, because if they don't like it, you can just say, whatever. But with a long-term partner, it is possible, because you can actually say, if I trust you enough and you trust me enough, we can actually have a real conversation where not only is the promise that we get better sex out of it, but actually I feel really accepted by you at that level, which is fantastic. Now, that's not entirely possible with a new person, because it doesn't have the context of trust around it. It just has the low risk around it, which is great.
It's not needed at that point.
It's not needed, yeah, exactly.
At that point, because if you are investing yourself into a relationship and you don't discuss these things up front very early on in a relationship, which you want some form of commitment,
sure,
and you then get quite far down the road and you get incredibly frustrated because your sex desires and stuff are not aligned, and then you decide that you're going to have that conversation and they're really not aligned, then what do you do at that point?
But I think you've got to define what you mean by relationship as well, because at what stage this takes place, do you have children, have you got a mortgage together, all these sort of boring things to do with being in a relationship. It then becomes difficult.
And all that routine and hamster wheel stuff undoubtedly weighs things down. But I think your question about what do you do when two styles don't match, clearly when you've just met somebody and they don't match, you just say, well, the easiest thing is just to find somebody who does match. When two people love each other and want to be together, but their sexual styles don't match, the really important thing is to conceptualize it differently. So what you're not doing, and this is imported from the love model, is to talk about a co-created experience, probably ending in crashing mutual orgasms. What you're talking about is a one-way, more of a one-way experience, where Tuesday night is your night, Suzanne, and Friday night is your night, Peter. And we deliver for the other person. Now, what do you get out of delivering for the other person? Because that's not really your stuff or your thing. What you get out of that is what Jacques Lacan says, which is desire is always the other person's desire. So when I see you really kind of like out there and transported, that works for me. And equally, when you're delivering for me, that works for me. So both ways around it works. It's just a different experience. And it acknowledges the thing that I think the, sex is an expression of love model doesn't acknowledge, which is that sexuality is individual. It's not co-created. It's yours and it's yours. And if we look at it like that, we are far closer to how we see everything else in our relationship, like our taste in music. Imagine if you two said, our taste, me and Peter's taste in music is X. It would be creepy. Me and Peter's taste in food is Y. That would be creepy. So what we do is we as we get to know each other, we love the differences. We go to eat Indian or Chinese. Just occasionally, we find an Indian-Chinese fusion, but it's not very often. And occasionally we eat Mexican, which we both kind of like. But, basically I've got to say, let's go for a Chinese. I know you love Chinese. I love seeing you love Chinese. And I quite like Chinese, but it's not necessarily my thing. Look at it like that. The journey of discovery with somebody that you really like is exactly the same thing. You feel accepted, you feel different, it's dynamic, and the sex is more rooted in the individuals. I think what goes wrong in long-term relationships is we never actually share ourselves, and that's the thing that we do in other areas, but not in sex.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's the same problem, I suppose, really. That the real problem comes when one person goes to the Chinese restaurant on a Friday night, and the other person in the partnership goes to the Indian restaurant with somebody else on a Friday night.
Well,
Then
that's right.
how do you make that transition from novelty and difference? If we're going to stick with Lacan,
Yeah.
difference. What? How do you make that transition to a place where you can both do separate and different things without it being a threat to the relationship? And that's, I think, what it comes down to for a lot of
Well,
people.
I think you can definitely, if you want to, go down the other partner's route. And my suggestion is usually that you don't do that illicitly, because actually the person that's having the affair may feel like they're getting that balance. Then they get the balance of the security, but actually what they end up feeling is they're doing the existential splits, and it never quite sits. And that's ignoring the ethics and the honesty issue. But I think people in more open relationships can find that can work. But I think the key thing is we would quite like to experience that sort of power of our sexual interest in the primary relationship. That's not an advert for monogamy, because I think it's just a model. It's just saying that that is quite often what we're yearning to do, if only we could. But I think there is a way through to that. Not it's not guaranteed, but I think it's basically a lot of conversation, a lot of trying to understand what it is that makes the other person's lights go on, which is nothing usually to do with techniques, positions, or ways of touching, but it's all to do with the general vibe and theme and approach, and also the ways in. Because
that's one of the aspects of polyamory, for example, that people find quite difficult. Is that it's endless bloody negotiation and
yeah.
conversation. You got to talk about everything all the time. You just want to
So,
have a shag.
Peter, that's so true. Because I was, as a relationship therapist, I get asked to do strange things sometimes. But the rule book in a monogamous relationship is essentially don't snog other people. The rule book in an open relationship, I was asked to help them write it, and it ran to three pages. Because it involves things like, do I spend money on my other person? If I take them out for dinner? No, that takes money out of our joint economy. And here's the really big one. Am I allowed to veto your choices? Well, there's no correct answer to that, because if the answer is no, you're not allowed to veto my choices. Okay, then I can date your brother. No, of course not. All right, then you can veto my choices. Well, yeah, I don't particularly like Sophie. You can't have a relationship with her. I mean, it's really hard. And go on, sorry.
Yeah, my other question is that obviously, as sex advice for seniors, we do come across issues around just loss of libido,
Yeah.
women during the menopause,
Yeah.
men's lack of testosterone, and
Yeah.
issues around erectile dysfunction,
Sure.
and people's shame around these sorts of
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
And so that's just completely aside from some of the stuff that goes on around negotiating, our individual desire. What
Absolutely.
happens if one person, as an example, just stops having desire? And it's not because they don't love their partner. It's just
Yeah.
simply because, they've
Sex has
reached a
gone off
point
the
in their life
agenda.
where it's just not, they're just not feeling it.
And I think if that's the case, I mean, loss of libido can have physical causes, and it's worth checking those out. But equally, it can be exactly as you say, just an emotional change in a person, and a loss of interest. I think generally, if we talk about high libido and low libido, we're more often looking at I'm getting what I want, and I'm not so much getting what I want. So there's a sort of discouragement on the one side, and so actually, again, conversation can open that one up. But I think if there's genuinely a loss of interest on one side, then I think there's a conversation about how you manage that, because I don't think it's necessarily easy to do that within the couple if you've just lost that sort of that drive. But it's uncommon. I think what strikes me is people said, "Oh, I haven't thought about sex for the last 10 years. It's not really doesn't really bother me. I don't even masturbate. It's just not really part of my world." And then something happens in the relationship, and then they form a new relationship, and suddenly they're having sex 3 times a night. And it all comes rushing back, and I think it's quite often we internalize our feeling of it not really working for us. We switch the volume down.
Yeah. And we kind of, I said it in an earlier podcast, I think, that's why we have affairs, because we're looking for that novelty, that new experience. We're not necessarily looking for a new love or a new partner or something like that. You're just looking for the novelty and
Sure.
the different experience,
And I think if we didn't tie into our primary relationship a feeling that cheating is about not bearing the other person in mind, not parenting them, then it wouldn't be so distressing. Because people that choose to go into polyamorous or open relationships of different kinds generally don't feel jealous and don't feel that their other person, their person has left them if they're sleeping with somebody else, because that is the product of monogamy mostly.
Yeah.
Yeah, completely. I mean, look, I think one of the biggest challenges that we have, especially as older people, is that for many of us, we have not been taught to talk about sex. And so opening up the conversation around all of this stuff can seem like a massive big deal for people. So what are your suggestions with regard to taking those little baby steps to getting to a point where you can talk about it? Because I know that for me, it took getting to the end of my marriage to do that. And then once I did that, I realized, oh God, this isn't so scary after all. And then I do that. And now it's just, I have that vernacular. I'm really comfortable talking about it. But I realize I'm very unusual in that way, because a lot of people don't.
That's true. I think the way of opening up a conversation is possibly, without putting too much stress on the job I do, to have a third person there. Because one of the things that happens is if I talk to my partner, so I'm talking to you about sex, and you're implicated in the issue I'm talking about, we get very defensive. So sometimes when we can talk about it through a third party, it's easier. But there's another way you can do it, which is you can talk about your own thoughts, preferences, fantasies, without talking about that being in the relationship, by talking about a book you've read, a film you've seen, an article you've read, and putting it outside the couple can really assist that process. And if you get used to doing that quite a lot, and in fact I recommend to couples, they have regular seminars on sex where they're not allowed to discuss the sex they're going to have or have had. They mustn't relate it to their own sex. They just talk about, why is porn so popular? Why do people enjoy dogging? What is the thing around BDSM? What is kink? All these intellectual topics. And it sort of opens them up to the idea that, this isn't, you don't have to be defensive when you're talking about things you like. And slowly it can become more personal, but, it's a way of doing it. And people sometimes don't expect that. Yeah, well, actually, Peter, what I do is I try and stress when I'm saying, let's have a seminar about sex. I don't mean with me there, but let's imagine having that in a pub. Firstly, do it in a pub, and secondly, distinguish it from pillow talk, because if you find that it's a turn on, well, you're going to have to keep that to yourself. But that's not a bad effect, but it's not one that you're actually you're just seeking to get into the whole idea that it's an interesting intellectual area, which of course it is, because we don't know why humans are born with this sort of ready-made ability to have, peak experiences of pleasure, but they are. And it's
Well,
you know,
that is the central question, isn't it? What the hell is going on, and why do we have these feelings, and why is it so complicated?
yeah, for sure.
Why is it not just about procreation and everything
Well,
else is incidental?
I think that the answer is that the evolutionary psychologists would have us believe
Yeah,
that they make it nice so that we do it, so that the
yeah,
human race survives. But I kind of think it's the other way around. I think that there's this eroticism suffusing reality, which we tune into sometimes, and other times we don't because we've got to get on with stuff. And evolution said, "Hey, that would be a good thing to hang what we do on. Let's hang it on that." And then, so it depends which is the which is prior.
right.
I don't see any reason for saying that reproduction is prior, simply because 99.9% of human sexual activity has nothing to do with reproduction. We're trying to avoid it like the plague.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's
I
true.
mean, it's funny you were saying about talking about shared fantasies and things. I did actually give a book that I really thought was super hot to somebody, and they got into about 5 pages, and they went, "Oh, I really thought this book was absolutely dreadful."
Yeah,
That was the end of that, really. And so I keep coming back to the fact that you know it's a nice philosophical discussion to have about this sort of nirvana that we would all love to live in, where
Yeah,
I get my Wednesday and you get your Friday, and
yeah,
everybody's like happy with that, and I get to do something to my partner that frankly doesn't turn me on at all, and they get to do something to me that frankly doesn't turn them on at all,
yeah,
and they love seeing me turned on because that's how much they love me, and
yeah,
I love seeing them turned on because that's how much I love them. The
yeah.
reality is I don't want to do that every bloody Friday,
yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
know, like
Well,
because I after a
Well, it
while I'm
becomes
like
part of the
it
routine.
it becomes predictable, and
sure.
I think, well, oh God, here we go again with the Friday, and ugh,
It's
so
like date nights,
it's so
very,
boring, you know.
very difficult to get date nights right. To set aside one night when you're not looking after the kids, or you're not caring for whoever,
Yeah,
either within or outside the relationship, and it's just you two, and then you very often find that doesn't work for a lot of people,
yeah. That's true.
because it's just becomes another part of the routine of the rut.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
oh my god, it's date night. I've got to be nice to them now, and
I think I'm just more of an optimist. Maybe I tend to think, I like going to the music that my partner likes listening to. I like going to gigs when
yeah,
it's not necessarily my music, and I have a great time. I like
yeah,
going to art exhibitions which aren't exactly my thing, and I have a great time. And
yeah,
so sex can be seen in the same way if you want it to. I mean, there's no doubt that if it's aligned with you, it gets better and better, and that's exactly why I'm saying that the best sex is with somebody that you really connects with that agenda,
yeah.
and vice. But that does take talking, doesn't it? That's the thing.
Oh, it
Oh
does.
yeah,
We've
I mean,
said all along that it's all about communication,
Yeah,
and
exactly. Yeah,
whatever
yeah.
the issue is, every time has come up the
Sure.
question, well, how do you actually talk about this? How do you raise it within a relationship?
Yeah, and it's hard.
Is it a threat to the relationship? Do
Yeah,
people avoid conversation
yeah,
as a result?
absolutely.
And I think that's been the case every time, really.
Yeah, I agree.
yeah, and sometimes there's a lot at stake when you,
Hmm.
like I said, when you have, if
Yeah,
you've never discussed it before and you suddenly have these conversations and someone is, well, either they feel quite like that they're not good enough, right?
Yeah,
mm,
yeah,
There can just be feelings of, well, you've only just told me this now, and
yeah,
how long have you been holding on to this for? And then
yes,
you feel like, do I even know you?
yeah,
I mean, that's why I always start at the beginning now, because I
yeah,
think you better get to know me now, because
yeah.
I'm not gonna dump this on you in like a few months time, and then you're gonna go, why
Um,
didn't you tell me that 6 months ago?
yeah,
So
Dan,
it's
I totally agree with that. I think couples that have a dialogue about it right at the beginning can use that conversation when things are not so great later on.
Yeah.
But if you don't have it right at the beginning when things are working, I think most people's logic is, if it's working, why talk about it? Well, talk about it because you will need to.
Anything that might threaten it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that's right. The only problem, of course, with that is, and I keep bringing up problems, is that we're not static beings. We change over time as well.
That's true. Yeah.
So the thing that we were into or not into, 7, 8 years ago when we first got together, and we are now into, how do you deal with that introduction of new elements into the relationship, sexual or whatever?
I mean, I think sometimes if you introduce new ideas later on in a relationship, it can be a shock, but it can also liberate the other person to do the same. So it can work both ways. But yeah, it's an interesting question.
Also, as well, that one of the things that I've seen in couples that have been together very long, and get into alternative lifestyles when things get a bit dull, or they're past the procreation stage, they've had their kids, and now they've left home, and they're looking at each other like, let's spice things up a bit. Then those are the couples, for me, that seem to have the most exciting dynamic relationships, because they've gone from doing the parenting thing and being in that family unit, and then moving to something different, recognizing that now they can do something different. There's nobody, they don't have to, they can walk around in rubber all day long at home if they want. They can get into naturism, they can do whatever they want. I've certainly met lots of older couples on like the BDSM scene and in the swing scene, and all those sorts of scenes where they get into it when they've been together a while, because they're like, we just thought, let's try something new. And they were quite and I thought, that's great when you can go from that sort of vanilla type relationship to something alternative. And similarly, if you start out as an alternative lifestyle person, it does become a part of your life. It's
I agree.
If you're in a BDSM type of relationship and it's really working for you, it can, if you're both really imaginative, you can make that work over a very long period of time, I think.
For sure.
Similarly with swinging as well, because you're introducing novelty all the time, you're always having fun, you're meeting new people, it starts to become social, you do all sorts of things. So I think it can work. As you said, it's all down to talking about it, and if you don't talk about it, then frankly, there's no hope.
I agree.
Well, you would. You're a counsellor.
Anyway, I think that's been great. We normally try and wrap these up at the kind of 30-minute mark. And that's been fascinating.
Wonderful. Thank you.
It's great to meet you both. Thank you very much for inviting me, and it's been a real pleasure.
And we'll put down your social media and where people can contact you and everything like that. If you send me all of that on.
I will do, of course. So,
thank
you so much, guys. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
See you soon. Bye.